field extraordinarily well. If you ask him about business deals he made in 1978, he will remember building materials and subcontractors' names and the whole process of working through a negotiation. But if you ask him anything that veers off of what he knows best, the knowledge base is very thin, and he tends to change the topic very quickly, a sentence or two, and he's off onto something else. And he has these sort of base topics that he goes back to when he's a little bit flustered about not knowing something, and so he'll just all of a sudden start talking about his TV ratings.
There was another thing that he would do is, I spoke to him only on the phone several times. If he was pressed on something, he would almost seem to get caught in a groove, and he would repeat the same thing over and over and over again. And sometimes one of my colleagues, Drew, was especially adept at this. He would sort of say, Mr. Trump, and kind of bring him back on course, and then we'd move on. But you're sort of joking aside, it was really a pronounced thing to be talking with someone who seemed to veer off and get caught in a groove.
He's a completely different person, I think, in person. He's really charming, he's very nice, he knows your name, he looks at you. I mean, everyone says that. It's not this bombastic guy that you see on TV. And everybody that's worked with him over the years say, I turn on the TV, I work with this guy for 20 years, turn on the TV, I don't know who this is.
This gentleman here? Yep.
I'm curious of the aspects of Trump's life and experiences that you researched. What of the challenges or situations were most analogous to the kinds of challenges the president faces? And what can we learn from those? I mean, your book has researched, and I'm looking forward to the chance to read it, how he dealt with women, how he dealt with celebrity, how he dealt with, you know, and business deals, but this is clearly not a direct analogy to what a president would face. Right. And so what can we learn, what is most instructive in this, in understanding what he would be actually like as a president?
Michael?
Well, you know, it's a great question, and the parallel is what he did running his businesses. And nearly all the businesses that he ran were private businesses, so they're difficult to examine until you go through ancillary sources like Casino Control Commission records, which Bob and other reporters did, for example. He did have 6 corporate bankruptcies. He has often said he had 4 corporate bankruptcies. This is instructive to understand how he sort of thinks. And clearly there were 6. And we asked him to explain when you say 4, what do you mean? He said, well, I think that the 3 casinos was 1 bankruptcy. In fact, there were 3 separate court actions for prepackaged bankruptcies, as they're called, and there clearly were 3 separate ones. But to him, it's 1. And part of it, he wants to put the best image out there. But the answer directly to your question is that he was told by his father, don't go deeply into debt. And as Bob O'Hara mentioned, he ended up going into junk bonds. He was hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in debt. Time and again, he thought that he was not going to survive. We talked to a person who was basically given the job of negotiating with bondholders and banks, and that person told us that he was very concerned. This is someone who knew Donald Trump as well as anybody. And he was very concerned about Donald Trump at this moment. He said, I'm looking at him, it's bankruptcy after bankruptcy. He's in the midst of a huge divorce. He's being humiliated day after day in the front pages of the newspapers, and I worry that, you know, he might take his own life. It's a very striking statement for someone who actually feels affectionately about Donald Trump. And what he said was, but when I walked into the office of Donald Trump, there he was. His suit looked perfect. His tie was perfect as well. And he would say, you know, what's next? What do we do next? And he had this ability, for whatever reason, to, instead of looking at, oh my gosh, there's all these terrible problems, to try to be thinking positively. One of his mentors was Norman Vincent Peale of The Power of Positive Thinking. Now that could either mean that he's detached from reality, if you look at it that way, or that he just is so positive oriented that he doesn't want to think about some of the deep problems he had. But the reality is that while he certainly says he's a great business person, that his businesses had trouble time and time again. Drew Harwell could talk more. He's here in the audience, a reporter who worked on this. But he had a public company at one time only, because he had to raise a lot of capital. And that company did do well at first. It paid Donald Trump millions of dollars. It had the stock ticker of DJT for his initials. But the stock price went from something like $35 to 17 cents. And the shareholders were very angry. There were lawsuits filed that we write about. But the bottom line is that Trump was able to survive. It's another example of being at the absolute depths and finding a way for himself to survive. And this is instructive. This is, Donald Trump views it as, I am there. His words are, it's a one-man army. And he talked in one of his books about the power of narcissism, for example. He cited a book by that name, and he said it's a very powerful thing. If you want to be successful, you have to think in that sort of tunnel vision way, only about making sure that you do survive. And another one of his points in the book, Think Like a Billionaire, he advises that you have a, quote, short attention span, unquote. So either he sees that as an attribute, or he knows he has this particular disposition and he tries to put it in the most positive way. But examining that business career and seeing, as we try to do in the book, the peaks and the valleys and exactly how he's operated, it seems to be the best guide for how he might try to operate as a chief
One
executive.
huge question comes up there is that he is the first president who has a lot of foreign holdings. As people look at his foreign policy, he's expanding abroad. Kevin Sullivan was here, went to Azerbaijan. We had reporters in Moscow looking at his dealings. They're in Panama. And we've never had anybody who would be in the White House who has their global business empire. And so your good question is how would this work? Is he going to divest? And is it enough to divest himself? Is the Trump Organization with the kids? I mean, the value goes up of his holdings all around the world. And he is increasing his worldwide holding. It goes up if he's in the White House.
If you think about what do presidents do, they synthesize information and come to decisions. They persuade people of their positions, and they have a program of some kind. Well, Donald Trump is not someone who takes in information very deeply. We asked him about how he makes decisions, what he reads, and he says he doesn't read reports or briefings or anything like that. He doesn't like to read anything of any length. He believes that he comes to decisions by gut, by instinct. And so he very much wants people to come in and tell him about something orally, and he believes that he will get the nub of it in a matter of seconds. He's obviously very good at persuading people that he knows a way forward. But when it comes to persuading people individually in the way that the president has to form coalitions and achieve compromises, that's something that he's done very little of in his career. He talks about being a great negotiator, and we've certainly spoken to some of his business associates who credit him for that. But we've also spoken to a lot of people who've worked with him who say that he's all about getting his way, and he's not one to reach compromises. Yes, over here. Go ahead.
So it's the mic. Wait for the mic.
No, right here.
Yes, I just wonder, his strong anti-Mexican narrative in this campaign, which has pretty much defined the campaign, where does it come from? And did you have people in Mexico researching or looking into his deals there? Could it come from his frustration? Apparently he didn't do very well down there.
Well, I was the bureau chief in Mexico for 5 years with my husband, Kevin Sullivan, and we went to interview the last two presidents to talk about this, Vicente Fox and Felipe Calderón. As far as we can tell, and especially having been at rallies, it comes from a lot of people in America like what he has to say. And he knows that. He gets reinforced every day. It may be the most popular thing he says. There's no hint that he's always, not like Mexico or anything. His gift is that he is saying, this is what we keep hearing at rallies and talking to millions of Americans, they're fed up. And he says, and he'll tell you that in interviews too, is that he's a reflection of what people want. He thinks that our immigration policies have been wrong.
To amplify that, I think one thing that's a safe bet with Donald Trump, although we can't be sure of it, is that he's actually the embodiment of a populist politician, and we've had a history of those going back 200 plus years. And they emerge periodically, and the patterns are very similar. They say what people want to hear. They try to appeal to people's anger and frustration. And it's possible that Donald Trump doesn't have any animus towards Mexicans, and that he's only playing the cards that he sees are out there for him to play with. And if that's the case, we should be troubled, because what we need to some degree in our leaders, I suppose, is a general sense that they're telling us what they really feel and the truth, and at least pursuing policies that are sort of generally in the interest of the country.
To add to what Bob's saying, I'd like to contrast his current position on Mexicans with what he said in the previous time when he was really close to running for president in 1999 and 2000. At that point, he was considering running as a third-party candidate against Pat Buchanan, remember him? And Donald Trump said that the reason he'd be a better Reform Party candidate than Pat Buchanan was he was all about inclusiveness. And he did not like the way Pat Buchanan spoke about numbers of people, including Jews, blacks, gays, and Mexicans. What we're seeing now when you go to the rallies and you experience that, and he said it himself, is that when the crowd gets low, he loves to bring out the issue of who's going to build the wall, because the crowd goes nuts. It's a way to add something to the political perspective that people can understand and that they have a very visceral response about. And for him, that's very important. In fact, we spoke to a number of people who are talking to him about the decision to run for president. And when he talked about the issues that were really important to him, the relationship with Mexico didn't really come up. In fact, a number of them were surprised when he talked. He made allusions to rapists and criminals crossing the border in the first week.
One of the people who spoke to who was closest to Trump gave us some guidance. He said, when you're trying to understand his motives, always go first to the idea that he thinks of himself foremost as a showman. And he will always choose the most provocative line of attack because he wants to get the response, the affirmation from the crowd. Yes, sir, over here.
Yeah. I want to ask about something that's really important in a president, and that's his temper. I want to let you know that in the 80s and early 90s, I was in charge of promoting Atlantic City. So I have a little bit of knowledge about this. When Donald Trump saw an article in the Atlantic City press, the worst editorial, he pulled the newspaper off the newsstand in all of the hotels, and Atlantic City Magazine, which they also own. He didn't like what the Casino Association did. He stopped paying the dues, which was 25% of the budget. So I was thinking it was intentional, and I was wondering if you found in your research anything that would give you some guidance as to what his temper will be like if he gets elected.
He said, he's said it many times, that I can be a screamer, quote unquote. And I'm familiar with the anecdote you're talking about in Atlantic City. And the person I referenced when I started talking this evening was John O'Donnell, who wrote a book called Trumped! And in that book, he repeatedly cites these temper issues and temperament issues. And in fact, O'Donnell got so frustrated with this temperament that he ended up quitting. He sent him a note saying, I'm leaving. I asked Trump about this. He said, no, John O'Donnell didn't quit. I fired him. So they're back and forth over this. But you do hear that from a number of people, and Trump himself has said that he is a screamer. Those are his own words. As to how that would reflect, Bob mentioned Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn was the lawyer for Donald Trump when the U.S. government sued Donald Trump and his father, Fred Trump, for race bias in 1973. And Roy Cohn advised Donald Trump, when you're hit back 10 times harder or 100 times harder. And that, is the root of his personality to a great degree. He absorbed that lesson, actually settled that case eventually. But time and time again, we see cases where you have a lot of lawsuits, and he has imbued that philosophy in himself, and that case also gave him an animus towards the federal government.
He settled the case only after dragging it out and attacking viciously the prosecutors through Roy Cohn. Right. And that's an aspect that he's more than a screamer. He is very open about wanting to punish people who, he often uses this phrase, viciously attack me. And You know, a lot of politicians want payback, can come now or later, but so he fits into that mold.
And it's worth noting that a lot of Americans find this appealing. Again, I think that there's a lot of people who think this guy, when he's hit, says he's going to hit 10 times harder, and that's what he's going to do out there. They like his, you know, confidence, and he is clearly feeding off of an enormous amount of Americans who like what they see on TV.
And that pugnacious attitude is something that we trace in the book all the way back to his childhood. There's a number of examples, stories going back to elementary school of really kind of ruffian behavior, as he calls it. Yes, sir.
You guys are really amazing. I don't present you both with me from Trump University.
Thank you.
And I'll get in touch with you, and I'll also get you a shirt of your size.
Okay.
My question is, which is very scary for me, is that after 2000, the press said they fell down on the job in not going after Bush's motives for going into Iraq. And it wasn't until a day or two ago I have seen the press begin to say, this isn't true. And not merely report on what he was saying, but some juxtaposition of it. He said this day, he said that day, and actually confront it. Because, you know, I'm very scared about voters who, as you said, let their passions, they like what they hear, but my credo is, let's get the facts and argue about conclusions. What do you expect the press to do? What is the obligation of the press to hold him accountable? And I'm not necessarily talking about the Washington Post, but in general, to hold him accountable and say, you can't, you can't make these allegations when the facts belie it.
All right. Well, we've actually, I'd say everywhere we go, we get a question about this sense that many people have that there's been light or non-aggressive coverage of Donald Trump. We also get the same question about Hillary Clinton. You know, I think the reporting that went into this book also fed more than 30 major stories that appeared in the Post over the last few months that go into great detail in pushing back against Trump's own narrative, own version of his life and successes and career. But you're right, there are other aspects of the news media that have not been as aggressive in doing the reporting that we think is our obligation in any presidential campaign or any campaign. So, you know, I think particularly in television, there are real questions to be asked about you know, giving over you know, greatly more time than was given to other candidates. But, you know, we can't control the debate. We decided that this was our obligation to do this reporting and commit enormous resources to this book and the stories that appear in the paper will continue to appear in the Post.
I mean, the Post has been banned by Trump for, and you know, I mean, he hates what we write. We have a fact checker full time. We've had all these good stories, but you know, it is a key question. I think the debate and strong moderators in the upcoming debates is absolutely critical because that's when everyone's watching. Because people look at one story and then they call up, they'll see one story about Hillary Clinton, and they'll say, why aren't you going after Donald Trump? And then they'll see one thing about Donald Trump, and then why this? So the debates are a rare time. They're both there, and it's going to depend a lot on the moderators.
And on the Iraq War vote, just to be clear, he made the idea that, you know, it hasn't been talked about except the last couple of days. This has been written about for months by other organizations, by our organization. Many times, the fact checkers are very mentioned that they do extraordinary work where they check everything in almost real time. And there's a story up today that basically they went over again what Donald Trump said. He did not say that I was against the war from the beginning, but in fact, that's not the case that he said on Howard Stern. That he was not. He didn't say he was against the war at that time. So every time that statement is made, the fact checker puts things out to say no, that's not actually correct. So I think
all the way in the back. Yep.
Do you think he needs says, or is it all just part of the show?
It depends what he's saying.
It's hard to believe sometimes in talking to him that he actually means what he says.
I think it's also important to note that, you know, there's an accuracy question and there's an honesty question for people. And for many people who support Donald Trump, it's not so much the facts, but it's the genuine passion that he elicits when he's speaking. And I think that's a very important distinction to make, and it's an important distinction to acknowledge. The fact that he gets up there and he says something that aligns with people, it's an empowering feeling. For those who feel that the Obama years have disenfranchised their ideas of how the country should operate and what a political leader should be. And one of the things that has been so important for his candidacy is that skill is one skill that Hillary Clinton has acknowledged that she really struggles with. And so I think, you know, when we talk about this genuine question, I think a lot of voters are wondering whether or not the candidates are genuinely listening to them. And on that front, Donald Trump is.